All right, today we are diving headfirst into one of the most absolutely legendary periods in all of history, the epic collapse of China's Han Dynasty and the rise of the Three Kingdoms. We're talking about a story just packed with heroes, villains, brilliant strategists, and unbelievable battles, all fighting to build a new empire from the ashes of the old one.
So here's our roadmap for this whole saga. First, we're going to see how a 400-year-old empire just started to rot from the inside. Then, we'll watch the rise and, oh yes, the fall of a truly brutal tyrant. From there, it's a total free-for-all between warlords. Then we get to the main event, the game-changing Battle of Red Cliffs. And finally, we'll see how three new kingdoms were forged in the fire of all that chaos.
Okay, before we get into the crazy battles and betrayals, you've got to understand this one key idea, the dynastic cycle. Think of it like the rules of the game for Chinese history. A strong new dynasty rises, everyone's happy, but over time, corruption sets in, things get bad, and people start to believe the rulers have lost the divine mandate of heaven. That leads to disaster and rebellion, which is exactly what was about to happen to the Han Dynasty after 400 years on top.
So, how exactly did a dynasty that powerful lose its mandate? Well, our story really kicks off with a golden empire that was, to put it mildly, rotting from the inside out.
This right here is the root of the whole problem. It all starts with a string of child emperors. You see, when a kid is on the throne, who really has the power? It's the people closest to him, scheming family members and the court eunuchs. They were constantly fighting each other for power and influence, which led to insane levels of corruption. And while they were getting rich, they were completely ignoring the fact that the actual people of the empire were suffering from droughts and starvation.
And into this total powder keg steps a Taoist wizard who basically gave the people's anger a divine purpose. He stood up and declared that the Han had lost their mandate from heaven. I mean, that is an incredibly powerful idea, and it lit the fuse for a massive rebellion, the Yellow Turban Rebellion.
Now, here is the critical strategic mistake. The Yellow Turban Rebellion was so huge, the central government just couldn't handle it. So they had to call in independent regional warlords to crush the rebellion for them. They won the battle, sure, but in the process they basically handed over all their military power to these ambitious generals who, as you can guess, would very soon want to carve up the empire for themselves.
So, with the central government weak and the court in absolute chaos, a massive power vacuum opened up. And, as we're about to see, it was filled by one of the most infamous and brutal tyrants in all of Chinese history.
The way he took power was pure chaos. Picture this. The head of the army, a guy named Jin, summons the warlord Dong Zhuo to the capital, hoping to use his army to scare the eunuchs. But the eunuchs find out and strike first. They assassinate Jin. The capital explodes into riots, and in the middle of all of it, Dong Zhuo just marches in, finds the young emperor fleeing the city, and with his army behind him basically says, "Guess I'm in charge now."
And Dong Zhuo didn't even try to play by the rules. He immediately replaced the emperor with a younger, more controllable puppet. He murdered anyone who opposed him, and then he did things that were designed to show his complete contempt for tradition, like wearing his sword in court, or get this, sleeping in the emperor's bed. Every one of these acts was a message. He, not the Han Dynasty, was in absolute control. But Dong Zhuo had a terrifying ace up his sleeve, his adopted son, Lu Bu. Now, Lu Bu was considered the single greatest warrior of the age, a literal one-man army. But he was also famous for being completely treacherous. The fact that a tyrant like Dong Zhuo put all his trust in a man famous for betrayal, well, that tells you everything you need to know about the shaky alliances of this era. Of course, the other warlords across China couldn't stand Dong Zhuo, so they all got together and formed this massive coalition to take him down. But it was a house of cards. They were all just as ambitious and suspicious of each other as they were of Dong Zhuo, and the whole alliance just crumbled from infighting. And in the most perfect, ironic twist, Dong Zhuo wasn't brought down by some grand army. Nope, he was taken down by the very weapon he thought made him untouchable. Lu Bu, the ultimate warrior, lived up to his reputation and assassinated his own adoptive father. A seriously brutal end for a truly brutal ruler.
Now, with the tyrant gone, you might think things would finally calm down. You would be wrong. So wrong. Dong Zhuo's death just removed the one enemy everyone had in common, and China immediately exploded into an even bigger, more chaotic civil war between dozens of warlords.
I mean, this period was just a dizzying dance of shifting loyalties. For example, you have the brilliant strategist Cao Cao making a temporary alliance with the virtuous hero Liu Bei. Their one common goal? To get rid of the one guy who is too much of a wild card for either of them to handle, the warrior Liu Bu.
But of course, the moment Liu Bu was out of the way, that alliance just shattered. Liu Bei tried to get the jump on Cao Cao, but he totally underestimated his rival. Cao Cao crushed him, forcing Liu Bei to flee south to lick his wounds. It just goes to show you, in this era, a political pact was only good until the next opportunity came along.
This next move was a true turning point. At the Battle of Guandu, Cao Cao was vastly outnumbered by his main rival in the north, Yuan Shao. But he used superior strategy, including an incredibly daring raid on his enemy's supply lines, to win a decisive victory. With this single battle, he became the undisputed master of all of northern China, and he immediately turned his eyes south.
And that leads us to it, the most famous, most legendary battle of the entire era. With the north completely under his control, Cao Cao raised an enormous army to invade the south and finally unite all of China under his rule. Only one thing stood in his way: a desperate alliance on the massive Yangtze River.
On paper, this should have been a slaughter. I mean, look at the numbers. Cao Cao had at least a 4-to-1 advantage. But here's where tactics, and especially geography, completely flipped the script. Cao Cao's huge army was made up of northern soldiers. They were exhausted, they were getting sick, and crucially, they knew nothing about fighting on a river as wide as the Yangtze. The Southern Alliance, led by Liu Bei and Sun Quan, were outnumbered, yeah, but they were defending their homes, and they knew that river was the greatest weapon.
And the plan they came up with was brilliant. It's a classic example of using your brain to overcome brute force. They used pure deception. A southern general pretended he was going to defect, and he sent his ships sailing toward Cao Cao's fleet. Only they weren't warships, they were fire ships, packed to the brim with flammable reeds. And as they got close to Cao Cao's navy, which he had foolishly chained together to stop his men from getting seasick, they were set on fire, turning his entire fleet into one giant raging inferno.
The result, an absolutely stunning victory for the underdogs. Cao Cao's dream of uniting China was completely shattered. This battle, the Battle of Red Cliffs, single-handedly ensured that China would remain divided, and it set the stage for the formal creation of 3 separate kingdoms.
So, in the wake of that incredible battle, the 3 major surviving powers went back to their corners, solidified their territory, and that chaotic warlord free-for-all finally cooled down into a new political order. And so, 3 new kingdoms were officially born. In the north, Cao Cao's son founded the Kingdom of Wei. In the southwest, our hero Liu Bei established the Kingdom of Shuhan. And in the southeast, Sun Quan created the Kingdom of Wu. But here's the ultimate irony, okay? Look at how they eventually ended. Wei gets taken over from the inside by a scheming clan. Shuhan falls to, you guessed it, a corrupt eunuch faction. And Wu is destroyed by a tyrant. In the end, they all fell victim to the exact same problems that destroyed the Han Dynasty in the first place. The dynastic cycle strikes again.
And so, after almost 100 years of constant war, China was finally put back together again. But not by any of the heroes we've been following. No, it was reunified by that Sima clan, the one that stole power from within Wei. They went on to establish the new Jin Dynasty, and they conquered the other 2 kingdoms.
So it really brings you back to this one big question, right? What is it that truly forges an empire? Is it the tyranny and iron will of someone like Cao Cao? Is it the shocking betrayal of a warrior like Liu Bu? Or was it all just destiny? The inevitable turning of that dynastic wheel we talked about at the very beginning. It's an incredible look at how ambition, strategy, and fate all collide on the battlefield of history.